This is Lecture 2, the second of 3 lectures in Module 2, Lesson 1. It discusses egoism. This lecture has 2 parts. Part 1 distinguishes psychological egoism from rational egoism, and Part 2 identifies 4 theories associated with egoism and compares them to their counterparts. These 4 theories include hedonism, relativism, subjectivism, and determinism. The egoist says the consequences are good if they're good for me. Compare this to the utilitarian consequentialist who promotes the greatest good for the greatest number. While egoism is by definition self-interested, it is not necessarily selfish. Some egoists hold that being friendly and law-abiding is the best way to live a carefree life, for example. Egoists are of 2 possible types, psychological or rational. Let's take a closer look at each. Psychological egoism holds that to be human is to be an egoist. It's impossible not to be an egoist. Political philosopher Thomas Hobbes may be the most famous psychological egoist. He held that humans are motivated first by an instinct for survival, and second, once survival is assured, a desire for comfort and ease, both egoistic concerns. An obvious objection to Hobbes would be any example of self-sacrifice, where somebody would sacrifice his or her interests in order to help somebody else, such as the proverbial soldier who throws himself on the hand grenade to protect his colleagues. On this point, you might read the optional article for this module by Bowie, challenging the egoistic paradigm. He agrees that the possibility of self-sacrifice refutes psychological egoism. And he adds that the corporate version of egoism is maximization of profits at all costs. He goes on to show how this is ultimately self-defeating and that a better approach is providing meaningful work for the employees, thus bringing out the best in everyone. A second type of egoism is called rational egoism or ethical egoism. It's different from psychological egoism in that it believes we could choose not to be egoists, but it argues that we should be egoists nonetheless. According to American novelist and philosopher Ayn Rand, perhaps the most famous rational egoist, we should choose to be egoists because the world is better off when people mind their own business, and it's irrational to deny one's own happiness. Once again, we can introduce self-sacrifice as an objection to egoism. For Hobbes, all we would have to do is come up with some example of self-sacrifice to prove him wrong. For Rand, we would have to come up with an example of self-sacrifice that is morally good. Back to our soldier who throws himself on a live hand grenade to protect his colleagues. This is a clear case of self-sacrifice, and it appears to be morally good, so we have a refutation of Rand's rational egoism. As long as we're discussing egoism, we might as well discuss 4 related issues: hedonism, relativism, subjectivism, and determinism. Hedonism argues that morality is a matter of pleasure and pain. In other words, an act is morally good if it produces pleasure, and morally bad if it produces pain. The word hedonism comes from the Greek word eirone, which means pleasure. An obvious objection to hedonism is that there may be morally good actions at times where there's no indication that anyone was pleased by it. Take our soldier again who throws himself on the hand grenade in order to protect his buddies. I think we could agree that what the soldier did was morally good, but I don't think it was good because it produced pleasure in him. A second related moral issue is relativism. Egoism is a relativist view or philosophy. The relativist argues that morality is relative to a time or culture. In other words, an act that is good at one time may be bad at another, or an act that is good in one culture may be bad in another. Take, for example, capital punishment or polygamy. The opposite of this view is absolutism, the view that there are absolute moral values. It looks like every human culture we know of finds justice to be a positive value, as an example of absolutism. Also, absolutism is logically more tenable than relativism because a relativist argues that there are absolutely no absolutes, an obvious self-contradiction. A third theory of egoism is its subjectivity. Subjectivists believe that morality is in the mind of the beholder, whereas objectivists argue that moral value is in the object of the character or conduct that one is judging. The primary challenge to subjectivism is that it reduces morality to a matter of taste. If the subjectivist is correct, then for me to say, for example, stealing is morally wrong, is nothing more than to say, I don't like it. For you to argue with me would be like arguing whether cream tastes good in coffee. Therefore, objectivism may make more sense as a moral theory, since objectivism allows for meaningful moral debate. The final of the four theories we want to consider under egoism is determinism. Many egoists are determinists. Thomas Hobbes was, for example, although Ayn Rand was not. According to determinism, there is no free will. People who believe in free will believe that at least sometimes we have the ability to do otherwise. The primary challenge to determinism is that it eliminates moral responsibility altogether. Since we're focusing on the moral responsibilities and rights of the leader, we'll continue under the assumption that free will is possible. So we've described and offered refutations for two sorts of egoism, psychological and rational. We've also identified and challenged four associated theories: hedonism, relativism, subjectivism, and determinism. Note that in refuting egoism and its four associated theories, we're not saying that one should never look out for oneself. Rather, we're saying that there is more to ethics than merely looking out for oneself. Utilitarianism agrees, so let's consider utilitarianism next.